Good evening, students, and welcome to tonight's webinar on Managed Project Scope. I know there's a couple more still due to arrive, but I thought I'll just get started on some of the preliminary bits and pieces. So my name is Tracy Hickey. I'm the Project Management Trainer, and I will be facilitating tonight's webinar for you, and hopefully answering any questions that you have as we go through the webinar. So before we get into the actual content of tonight, I just want to go through a couple of housekeeping things and allow a little bit of time for some extra other people to join in. But you'll have your navigation panel there. So you'll see a section where you've got the icon where the little hand is, where you can raise your hand, and there's also a section where you can type any of the questions that you have as you go through. So just as we get into it, I just want to make sure that everybody can see the screen okay, that you can all hear me okay. So if you could either just raise your hand or just type in the question area that you can see and hear okay, just so that I know that everything is working the way it should do. Yep, good. We've got hands there, so it looks like we are all on track. The other thing that I just want to, if you can't hear me, just make a note in the question area as well. The other thing I want to point out is just under the handouts section, I've actually put a PDF of tonight's webinar slides that you can download and keep. So the first half of the webinar, I'll be going through the slides on the PowerPoint. Then I'll be switching across to going through the live documents of the actual assessments. So all these early slides, feel free to download that PDF file, and you've got a copy of this key information anyway for moving forward. So that's some of the key housekeeping bits and pieces. On tonight's webinar, to start with, I want to have a look at what project management is as a whole, as an overall skill set and industry, and what it's all about. And then I want to break it down into the key concepts within scope, which is this first module that we're looking at, and why that's so important in a project. Then I want to break it down further into choosing the right project for your assessments, because within the diploma course you have the option of using the provided case study, or you have the option of using your own work-based project. So I want to just go through what the benefits are of both of those before you commence, and that way you can make decisions accordingly. Then we're going to have a look at some general tips for completing assessments, and going through the specific scope assessment documents and how to complete those. So we'll look at the case study document, but then overall look at how to complete the assessments, whether you're using the case study or your own work-based project. And then at the end, we'll have a time for questions. So feel free during the course of the webinar to type any questions that you have as we go through, and I will answer those as we go. But at the end, there will be some general time. If there's anything that I haven't answered throughout the webinar, then you'll be able to just clarify anything at the end as well. So that's just some of the things that I want to look at covering tonight. But before we get into that, I just want to also highlight your support options as students. Distance education, I personally think, is a wonderful way to learn. You can fit study around work, you can still work full-time, you can fit it around study and family and work and other things, hobbies and things that you have going on in your life. So doing distance education really allows you to get the qualifications that you need without, having to, quit work or drop down to part-time or any of that sort of thing. So it's a really good way, and you can study at your own pace, so you can progress as fast or as slowly through the course as long as you complete within the final deadline, but you can fast track it if you need to, and there's a lot of benefits. I actually have done a lot of study by distance education. I'm actually on my last project for my MBA at the moment, and I've done that completely through distance education. So yeah, I'm a big supporter of distance education. I think it's got a lot of benefits, but I do know that there are times when it can feel quite lonely, and that you can sometimes feel unsupported, or like, who do I talk to, or how do I, you can get stuck on things and not know where to turn. So what this slide here is just to let you know that you're not alone as you go through the journey. There's actually a number of different groups of people that are available to help you as you progress through your course over the next 18 months with us here at Open Colleges. So the first is the student support team. That's the direct number for the business area for the student support team that we fall under. The hours are there. They're available until midnight on weekdays and between 9 and 5 on the weekends. So there's actually a lot of time when they are available. So student support are great for any administrative questions you might have, or if you have any, have problems with uploading anything in open space, or you just want to check where you're up to in your course, any of that kind of stuff. Student support are great, so you can call them. The learning support team is also an amazing resource for just getting started. They do a daily webinar through Open Space. Some of you may have been through that webinar already. I don't go through Open Space tonight, so I won't be showing you where the learning materials are and where to download and submit assessments, etc. That's what the Learning Space Orientation webinar will do. So if you haven't been on that and you haven't fully got your head around Open Space yet, feel free to join one of their webinars. And they also do one-on-one appointments that you can book at that oclearningsupport.weebly.com link. If you need help with setting up a study plan, or you want just general study tips, you can set up a one-on-one and ask them all sorts of questions, and they can look at your schedule and work out a plan to help you, etc. So the learning support team are great for just general study assistance. Then when we come into the specific project management course, you have fellow students that you can have as a study buddy. So you can find recommended study buddies under the contacts area in your message center. You'll find students there that are up to a similar stage of the course as yourself, so you can start to connect with people who are moving forward. And some people work well with study buddies, others don't like it, but if you work well with having someone to bounce ideas off or to help keep each other motivated, then feel free to reach out to some of your fellow students and have a study buddy. Then you have your academic staff, which are the assessors. So within this diploma course, we have 3 assessors, Edgar Yu, Jim Johnson, and myself will be assessing the assessments as they come through. The other assessors are not full-time with Open Colleges. They actually are out in the industry working on projects. They have their own consultancy firms, etc. So they're very in touch with what is going on in the industry today. So they'll give you feedback on your assessments and things like that. But I'm the full-time trainer here at Open Colleges that is available for you anytime. So you can go through Message Center, send me messages, ask me any questions, and I'll be able to help you. I'll also be doing webinars on different subjects from time to time that you can join and things like that. So feel free to let me know when you need help with things. So there's lots of different support depending on what it is that you are looking at. So that's all the support that you have. So I know we've had a number of other students that have joined in now. I was just going through some of that introduction area. As I was saying earlier, there is a download handout PDF document of these slides, so feel free to download that, and you'll have copies of all of this on hand. And I hope everybody can see and hear. Just for all the students that have just joined in the last couple of minutes, if you can hear me and see the screen okay, can you just raise your hand? There's a little hand icon, just to make sure we're all good and ready to move on into the next section. Awesome. All right, so let's get into talking about project management. I personally love project management. I think it's such a diverse, interesting field, lots of different skills that you learn. It really yeah, you need to be a good all-rounder. So I think it's a great area. Project management as a whole is a set of skills and a discipline that can be applied to a whole range of different industries. Often when people think project management, they think infrastructure. So they think of your construction and mining and government and council type projects and things like that that take place. And that is where there's a lot of, obviously, project management jobs. Many of you are probably working within some of those fields, particularly in the diploma course. I know we have a lot of students who are already working in various industries within a project management capacity. But you'll find project management is very big within IT as well. There's a lot of IT projects that utilize project management. And also, like my background is more events, sales, marketing, business development, training, all those sort of areas more so than infrastructure. So even within all of those areas, events in themselves are projects. So yeah, you'll find that the skills that you learn through the course, you'll be able to apply to lots of different jobs depending on where your career takes you. Even if you change direction, another 5 to 10 years, the skills that you learn in this course will be very beneficial to any job that you go into. So I think they're great skills to learn. Projects are often used in organisations to help achieve a strategic objective. There might be a new opportunity, there might be requests from customers or some form of demand in the market that necessitates a new service or a new product or something being launched. So projects are often set up to capitalize on those and to develop and introduce those new products and services. Sometimes they're used because there's been changes and things have to be modified or changed within an organization, technological changes. Often there's environmental or legal things that have necessitated a change within an organization. So you'll find projects can be anything from a small month-long small project to, massive project, 2-3 years. So depending on what it is, there's obviously a lot of change in that. And project management is just applying the knowledge, skills and tools and techniques that you learn to that project to meet the requirements and ensure that what you deliver at the end meets the needs of the stakeholders, that what you were asked to do, you deliver on at the end of that project. One thing that's important, particularly if you are choosing your own project as your assessment, is to understand that a project is a unique endeavour. So it's a one-off endeavour that has a defined beginning and a defined end, and it's got a finite or a limited set of resources, whether that be human resources, financial, material resources, etc. So you've got a set time frame, set budget, and it's got a beginning and an end. So anything that's a routine or repetitive, ordinary daily work is not considered a project. As a couple of examples, taking meeting notes, administrative type day-to-day office work is not a project. Writing a book would be writing a project because it has a start and an end. If we jump to the end one, the manufacturer of, say, an Apple iPod or any product, that's just an operational day-to-day task. So that's not considered a project. But if you were to design a new media player, you would. So I just mention that because it's important to make sure that if you do choose a work-based project, that it is a true project that has a very clear beginning and an end, and it's not just something that takes place on a day-to-day basis within your organization. So that I just want to point out. The other thing I just want to draw to your attention is this diagram here. That's actually in your textbook, so you can refer to it and have a little bit closer. But when I was talking about it's got a set start and a set end, that start is the beginning of what is known as a project life cycle, and every project goes through the cycle, regardless of the size or the type of project that it is. It all goes through this cycle. So the beginning stage is the initiation stage or the concept stage of a project, and that's where the idea is there to start the project, and all that high-level budget time frame is established, the project charter is established, And basically the project manager is put into place and given the authority to start moving into the planning stage of the project. So, you know, the board or the sponsor will say, yeah, this is what we want to do. This is the high level information. Now, you know, appointing, you know, so-and-so as the project manager, and then we move into the next stage. So there's a kick-off point. The next stage is the planning stage, which can be quite lengthy depending on the complexity and the length and the size of the project. But during the planning stage, that's where the project management plan is developed. We work on our schedules, our detailed budgets, look at what resources we need, all the risk analysis, define the quality. We look at what procurement we need, how we're going to communicate with stakeholders, project team, etc. So the planning stage always is planned next, and each one of those plans is signed off on and become our baseline that we then use as the foundation or the sort of baseline for measuring the actual project once we get into the execution of it and start moving into the work of the project. So, for example, our budget, when we have that approved budget, that becomes our baseline, and then as we start to move through the project and we're incurring our costs, we measure our variances off that approved baseline budget, etc. So we can see if we are on track with the project or if we're starting to go off base. And that work stage of the project is the execution stage. Sometimes you might hear that as the implementation stage or the delivery stage of the project, depending on industry and companies. But that is when the work really gets done. So we start to deliver on our different milestones and work through the project. We deal with our stakeholder management, our team management, deal with issues that come up, negotiate, deal with conflicts. We look at doing our project reporting. Any change management takes place during that stage. So we're looking at everything that's going on. And you'll see that dotted line, and that's because we're monitoring and controlling everything during that stage. Are we on track? If not, what do we need to do to get it back on track? Do we need to make a formal change? And then we would complete a change request or a change order form, get that approved, update documents, etc. So the execution stage is where the fun begins and all the true skills of project managing kicks into gear in a big way. And then eventually the project will come to an end and we will hand over that product or the service. We'll do our final reporting, close it off, do our lessons learned, look back, what worked, what didn't work, document it, so we move forward. And that's that kind of closing stage of the project or the completion stage or the finalization stage. There's different terms, different industries and companies will use, but basically every project follows this life cycle. And I just wanted to flag this because as you complete your assessments, it will help if you can identify and understand what part of the project you are in, what stage of that project life cycle you are in when you are completing your documentation. So you'll find a lot of the O2 written assessments, the first written assessment that you'll do through the modules, will often be in that initiation and planning stage, and then the last written assessment will be within that executing, closing second half stage. So if you are completing a planning document for an assessment, you wouldn't, for example, include some of the changes that happened later in the project because you're at the planning stage, you don't know what's coming. So sometimes when you are completing assessments in retrospect, it's easy to put what happened in the project into your early documents when, if you think about it from the perspective of, all right, I'm at the planning stage, I don't know what's coming, and plan it accordingly. It'll just help you frame your assessments a little bit more realistically. Like I've had some students that have put the results of what happened in the project into their authorization form, for example. So it's important to know what document are you completing, what stage of the project, what information do you know at that particular part, and it will just help you with that perspective a little bit. So that's your project life cycle. Next thing is, let's break that down into managing scope, because this is where it all starts, and this is the first module that you complete because it's the foundation of every project. We don't move into the management of scope until we have formal authorization for the project to commence. So once it's been, yes, the project is happening, the first thing we do is we need to gather our requirements. We've got to find out, what is this project all about? As an example, if I were to say to you, I want you to build me a house, tell me how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. Before you could even begin to think about timeframes and what resources you need and how much it's going to cost, we have to go back to scope and find out what is required. So what kind of house do I want? So you'd ask me things like, is this a 3-bedroom house, 5-bedroom house? Is it 1-story, 2-story? Are we going to have a 1-car garage or 2? Are we including landscaping? Is it going to have a pool? What quality fittings do we want? Are we putting, in my case, it would have ducted air conditioning right throughout. So all of those details of what is actually required needs to be established first and defined very clearly before the rest of the project can take place. So that's what scope management's all about. It's finding out what are the deliverables, what features, what functionality for the project, for the product or service, what are we going to be delivering on? And then we need to define that and document that in our scope management plan. You may also have like a scope statement or a scope of works, depending once again on your company. But you'll have that document where you will say, this is what this project's all about, this is what we're delivering, this is what's in scope, and this is what's out of scope. And that's just as important, because there's no point saying, this is what we're going to be delivering, we're going to give you a 3-bedroom house with landscaping, and I think that means that I'm getting a pool, but you think, no, you haven't documented that as a pool. When it comes time to hand it over, I'm going to be disappointed, because I'm going to be like, well, where's my pool? And you say, well, we weren't including a pool. And I'll be like, and we go back to the documentation. It's like, well, it wasn't noted anywhere. So noting what's out of scope, if it's very clear at the beginning, a pool is out of scope, we're not putting a pool in, it sets it right from the beginning. Everyone knows what to expect, and it just makes it much easier to effectively manage that project, and it stops you getting into some of the scope creep a little bit more too. So gather your requirements, document what's all about, and then from there, once you know what's going to be needed, we can develop up our work breakdown structure and start to break down the work within that particular project in the different areas. You can create a work breakdown structure by phase and follow that project life cycle, what's happening at the planning stage, and then moving into an execution stage and establishing it by different milestones, or it can be done by parts of the job and different deliverables that you need to deliver on. So you'll find in the textbook there's quite a few examples of work breakdown structures, and it's, if you're not familiar with it, some of you will be very familiar with working with work breakdown structures. If you're not, have a look at the examples that are in the online materials and in the textbook, and you'll see how it starts off at top level and breaks it on down to the next levels within the work that's within it. So you'll be able to see it right down from the top level right down to the bottom level, and the purpose of it is so that you capture everything in it and you're able to then work out your estimates for how long it's going to take, what it's going to need, what the budget's going to be, what resources you're going to need. Do you need to procure anything for this particular work package, etc. So it forms the foundation of everything else in the project. You get it wrong at the beginning here, you will end up finding it very easy to go over budget and over schedule, etc. later on. So there's just got a question here. Not sure about others, but I don't know who actually scopes my company's projects. But those are done in 5-year plans for us, but I take the scope as how the project is in a scope expanded. Once again, it depends on the size of a project. Most projects have a set deliverable. This is what we're going to be doing at the beginning and end. If it's just a smaller project, like a house, for example, it's very easy at the beginning to establish the whole of the scope at the beginning. If it's a bigger plan, like if it's done over a 5-year plan, usually there would be a range of projects that would fall within it, and it may even be done by key milestones and key aspects, and not all of it may be scoped right at the beginning, but there should be still a big picture of what's going to be included, even if parts of it are very high level to begin with. So you'll find it within multiple individual projects that must be completed in the 5 years. Okay, yeah, so you would work on each individual project, would have its own scope, and it would have its own work breakdown structure for that particular project, and then the schedule and the budget for that would be done. That may roll into other projects, it may be expanded on, but generally you'd start with a set plan, otherwise you can't establish a budget and a schedule to match that scope. What we have here, this next part, is monitoring and controlling to avoid scope creep. A lot of projects do change, or they may get added, or decisions are modified, they may be expanded, they may be reduced, and there's a couple of reasons why that might happen, which we'll look at on the next slide. But as long as the change control process is formally engaged, so change orders, change requests, etc., and changes are made through a formal process where they are documented. This is the change. We are going to be adding this feature or adding this to our scope. If you do it formally, like if you are expanding the scope, for example, you use a form, put it through the formal change process. When that gets signed off on and approved, if it's going to be noted that it needs extra time, extra budget, because that amendment will be approved, usually that means that you will, hopefully anyway, be given the extra time and the extra budget that's needed. And that's what it's saying here, to monitor and control to avoid scope creep. You don't want to be making changes without having them officially approved, because you could end up totally off track, or you could end up adding a whole lot and expanding the scope of a project but not have the adequate support with time and resources and budget that you need. And all that's going to do is put enormous pressure on the project team, and you're going to have all sorts of issues with people getting frustrated and things like that. So generally there's an approved starting point, and that becomes the baseline that I mentioned before, but it can change. Budgets will change, schedules can change, scope can change, quality requirements can change, but there's a starting point that's agreed on, and then any changes that happen after that, if they're put through the change process, then it's approved, and then things get updated and added and budgets get expanded and whatever, but it's done in a controlled manner. So I hope that kind of answers your question. The key is monitoring and controlling things as they progress, so that so that things are controlled properly and managed correctly, and then all your documentation is officially updated so that everybody is working off the correct information. So that's the importance of monitoring and controlling the work that you're doing. And then at the end, of course, you'll close the project. Handing over the deliverables and documenting your lessons learned are all part of scope management as well. So it takes it right from the beginning planning stage through the monitoring and controlling of what's going on when the work is being done, to the very end when you actually hand those over, make sure that they meet the requirements, and then we move on. And I'll just show you the slide before I check if we've got any other questions. The triple constraints, or the iron triangle that you'll sometimes see, this is where you'll always have this battle between scope, your resources, your budget, people, etc., and your schedule. And any time you make a change in one of these three areas, it's going to affect the others. So looking at what was asked before, if we're going to expand the scope and we're going to add extra features or extra functionality or extra deliverables onto the scope, it's going to have an impact on the budget and it's going to have an impact on the deadline. So usually they have to be adjusted as well. Sometimes we have to cut budget and that can put pressure on the other areas. So we have these three that we need to understand where the priority is for our project. Where do we have the ability to flex, and where do we have what's constrained, what is fixed and we can't make changes. And then the whole time we're trying to maintain the quality standards as well, so we're not compromising on the quality within the project. So for example, if you're doing an event, schedule is fixed. You can't change that schedule. You can't book a gala dinner and decide that you're running a bit behind schedule, so we'll just bump it back by 2 weeks when we have sold tickets and promoted and things like that. So sometimes you'll find the deadline is fixed, so you have to adjust scope, cut back some of what you're trying to do, or increase budget so you can put more people on the job so you can get it done in time. So knowing that the schedule is fixed means you know you've got the other two areas to work in. Something scope is fixed. Anything that's, like if you're doing releasing a new drug for a new treatment, it's got very strict quality standards and tests and things it's got to pass. Anything that's got legislation or regulations around it. If you're working with brakes on a car, for example, they have to be exactly to brief. So sometimes the scope has to be exactly fixed. You don't have the option of changing it, and so you might have to add more money or delay the launch or something like that. So you would need to flex in the other areas. Sometimes it's the budget that's fixed no matter what, and you have to work with the other areas. So understanding where the priority is on your particular project, where do you have the ability to flex, and where do you have the ability to be strict on it is important. And it just helps make the decisions easier when you actually get into the day-to-day work of the project and issues are coming up and you've got to deal with things and address things and make decisions. Knowing where you've got the options will make it a little bit easier anyway. So I just wanted to flag that as well, just as a introduction, I suppose, to how to frame your thinking as you start to move through the project. So is there any other questions at this point before we start getting into the actual assessments for the second half of the webinar? If you're all good, everyone's ready to move on, maybe just raise your hand so I know that we're good to continue on. Yep, okay. Hands up everywhere. Perfect. So let's now look at scope. As I mentioned before, within the diploma, you've got the option of choosing a work-based project or using the case study. Whichever project you choose, make sure that it has that defined purpose and a start and end, and keep in mind that this will be the project that you will build on right throughout the course. So later on, near the end of the course, we do manage project integration, where we start to show how all the parts of the project work together. And so you'll need to pull together a portfolio of all the different documents that you've created throughout the assessments. So it's much easier if you've used the same project right throughout. So keep that in mind when you decide whether to use a work-based project or the provided case study, which is a CRM project. Either way, or whichever one you use, make sure at the beginning you take the time to fully understand the organisation and the project that you're going to be working in. The more you can imagine yourself in that scenario and working in that project and in that organisation, the easier it will be for you to put yourself into the different assessments and complete it. So, and because it builds as you go through the course on it, the more you understand it at the beginning, the easier the subsequent assessments become. The benefits of using the case study is that all the background information is provided for you in the additional resources folder. If you don't know where that is, when you're in open space, there's a circle that's above the module 1 circle that's got a little book folder type icon on it, and that's where the additional resources and all the case study documents are. So all your background information is provided in there, and when you come to needing to do changes or audio recordings and things like that, the scenarios are provided for you with the briefing notes to know what you can base it on. So it helps give you some, guidance on what to start with, and it might give you a chance to learn about a new industry or project that maybe you're not familiar with. If you've never worked in a IT sort of CRM type of a project, it could give you a good chance to see what is involved in that. So that's one of the benefits of using the case study. The benefits of using your own work-based project is that you can apply what you are learning to your own work environment, and you'll learn the skills that are relevant to your industry, and you may benefit your organization by learning some other best practices or other things that perhaps you haven't, they may not be doing, particularly if it's a smaller company, or that there might be some things that you learn that you can bring in that might help to streamline some of their practices. So whichever one you choose, particularly if you're choosing your own project, just make sure that it's robust and complex enough to use throughout the course. If it's not, you might need to create some fictitious sort of issues or scenarios, because if an issue didn't arise, you might need to create something that would be possible in that sort of scenario. So if you've had a fairly decent project, then you've probably had issues and complications and a range of things that are going on in it that you can use. And it's also important that you make sure that you meet the assessment requirements, because we're not conducting like an RPL process with the assessment thing that we're doing here. So when you've got an assessment and it specifies certain requirements for that assessment, we have to make sure that those requirements are met. So just uploading what you've done at work alone may not address all of those criteria if your documents miss out certain sections, because every company will have their own way of presenting their information, and sometimes they are tailored to suit that particular company. So there might be sections that may not be part of your documentation that would be required in the assessments. So you just need to make sure that you meet all of the requirements, and that's where completing and using the templates that are provided might be good. If you transfer your project information into those templates, it can make sure that you've covered everything. So just keep that in mind if you are using your own work project, that you do address all the criteria, and if need be, just add in extra information where you need to. It doesn't matter if it didn't really happen. What you're showing is understanding and application of the concepts in a scenario. So it's just used as a basis for your assessments. So that's just some tips on the project that hopefully will help you to decide whether to go with your own work-based project or use the case study. All right, so just some general tips for completing assessments. Like the project briefs, also make sure you take time to understand the learning content and the concepts in the module before you launch into the assessment tasks. So I went through some of the key things in managing scope. So get a good understanding of those concepts. There's a lot of videos in the learning material. You've got your textbook. Sometimes there's links to some more academic journal articles, etc. So there's lots of different types of content that can help you understand the different ideas and concepts. So make sure you understand it all before you hit the material. If it's something that's new to you, there are learning activities throughout the learning online material that you can use to practice. And you'll see them as you go through. Now, they are not assessed, so in essence they're not compulsory, because no one is actually going to look at them. But what it does is it gives you a chance to practice what you're learning. You can see how other students have approached that particular activity, because we all approach things slightly differently. So it's a good way to learn from each other and just get different perspectives, and it will help you to understand that concept a little bit more. But as I said, they're not assessed, so just move through them as quickly as you need to. If it's something that you know backwards, if you're highly experienced in a particular area, you don't need to do it. But if this is all new to you, then I highly recommend that you complete those learning activities just to help you make sure you're on the right track with everything. You'll find that there are references in the assessments to topic numbers. Use these as a guide because sometimes the module number is missing from the front of them. And the reason that is because it assumes that you are in the module that you are in. So if you are working on a scope assessment, it assumes that you are within module 1. So sometimes the topic reference doesn't have the 1 in front. So the assessment might say, refer to topic 2.4 for guidance. So if it looks like the module number is missing from the front, just put that in front and then go to 1.2.4, for example. You'll never be referred to content outside of the module that you are in order to answer questions. So if you're in module 1, you'll always be referred to a topic within module 1, so 1.1.3 or 1.2.4 or 1.3.5, etc. So sometimes they've been missing off the front, and we are fixing that, but it's going to take a little while. So I just wanted to flag that because sometimes that can cause a little bit of confusion. Every module starts off with a quiz as the first assessment. It's a multiple choice, self-marking, it automatically marks it by the computer quiz. You must score 80% or higher to pass. But if you don't get that on your first attempt, you just need to wait 24 hours and you can have another attempt. And if you still don't pass it on that attempt, you can wait another 24 hours and have a third attempt. Because the course is competency-based, you can have as many attempts as you like at any assessment. So you don't have to have everything perfect on your first attempt. You just need to resubmit if it's not quite right. So yeah, if you haven't got 80%, you'll just need to wait that 24 hours and then have another attempt. And then it'll be potentially up to 24 hours on your results page for resubmitted assessments to update. So if you've got a resubmitted assessment marked, but it hasn't shown up, just wait that 24 hours and you'll find your results page will update. If it gets beyond that and things still aren't looking right, that's when you would phone student support and ask them to look into it for you. So that's just a couple of key things. So the quiz is the first assessment. Then there are 2 written assessments per module. We don't accept drafts, as I said, because you have unlimited attempts. So if you're not sure if you're on the right track, what I would suggest is that you give it your best shot, do as much as you think is correct, and then just submit it. What will happen is you'll either be on the right track and everything will be great and you'll get a grade back and you'll be able to move on, or if you're not quite on the right track or there's something you need to adjust, you'll actually receive formal feedback from the assessor to say you need to work on this section or this section, and they'll give you a little bit of idea of what you need to rework on. So you can then make those changes and you can resubmit a second time. And if you need to, you can have a third submission as well. As I said, it doesn't matter how many times. If you ever get feedback and you're still not sure on what you need to do, that's when you can message me and I can have a look at what feedback you got and I can give you a little bit more guidance beyond the feedback. So just ask if you're not sure. But the best thing to do is just to submit it and then see how you go from there. Where possible, use the assessment task document that you download to complete your answers and keep as much as possible on that one document, and use the templates if they've been provided where you can. The reason I say that is if it's all on the one document and you've used the templates, you've got a better chance of making sure that you've actually addressed all the requirements. You can double check to make sure that every part of the assessment you've actually answered. There's less issues with uploading and it makes it easier for the assessor to see that yes, you have completed everything. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes you'll have an audio file, or when you're doing a Gantt chart, that might be in MS Project or Smartsheet or Excel or something, some other software package. So sometimes you will have more than one document, which is fine. But if it's all Word-based stuff, try and keep it all on the one. It just makes it easier, less issues with uploading and things like that. The word count you'll see on there, use that just as a guide. Sometimes, particularly if you've got a complicated project and it's quite complex, there's no way you would be able to stick to the word count and be able to adequately describe, on your scope management plan, for example, and define the scope of that project, particularly if it's quite extensive. So just use it as a guide. If you're way under, you probably don't have enough detail. If you're way over, unless it's a particularly complex project, you've probably gone into too much detail. And don't worry so much about it on the templates. It's probably even more applicable when you are writing emails or writing paragraphs to explain improvements or some of those type of things. That's probably where it's more applicable. But once again, use it as a guide. You'll soon get feedback from the assessor if it's not enough detail or too much, and we can go from there. And obviously, make sure your student name and number on the first page. Make sure you've submitted all the parts and proofread your work. Think of this as going to your boss or your CEO. How would you want them to see your work? And make sure that it's presented well. Proofread it, no spelling, grammar, etc. Mistakes all through it. So just think of presentation. The other part that you will find is that there are audio recordings required, and that's because communication is a massive skill in project management. There's no point being brilliant at written documentation if you can't get on well with people and you can't communicate, listen to questions, negotiate, etc. So handling conflicts and communicating are important skills, and the only way they can be assessed is by hearing a conversation. So that's why the audio requirements are in there. But they don't need to be a real life situation. You can role play it with a friend or family member. Just give them some briefing notes, some points. They can read their parts if needed, but from your perspective, it's best if you can have a more natural conversation. So maybe give yourself some key points, but try to have a discussion as if you're at work and you're just discussing an issue or something like that. Doesn't matter if you fumble a little bit. It's better to show a more natural communication rather than reading a script, which can become quite well, it takes longer to put together as well, but it also can become quite static when you're reading it, and it doesn't really reflect true communication. Easiest way to record it, if you've got a smartphone, you can use the camera on your phone and record a video. You can put it face down so you don't get the visual, but you just pick up the audio, or just use a voice memo or a dictaphone app, something like that. Any of those options work really simply, and then just upload that audio file along with any Word documents or PDFs or other files in open space when you submit. And just stay as close as possible to the required length. So if it says 5 minutes, aim for 5 minutes. If it says 10, aim for 10. We don't want to get 20 or 25-minute audios coming through. They just get too long for the assessors. So, and it becomes quite a lengthy thing for yourself. So most of them are only 5 minutes. So you don't overthink or get too stressed out about the audios. It's purely to show that you can communicate, and that's the primary aim of the audio recordings because it's such an important skill. I know it can be a bit nerve-wracking for some students, but try and have fun with it. Okay, looking at the specific scope assessments now. All the written assessments are very practical, so you don't have to worry about formal academic writing or in-text referencing. If you use other resources, just note them at the end of the document, but you don't need to be really formal with your academic writing. They're very practical, as if you are in the workplace. Your role in the assessments is the project manager, so make sure you complete the assessments from that perspective. Particularly if you are using a work-based project where you aren't the project manager, you need to still complete your assessments as if you are the project manager. So when you do your audio recordings, etc., assume that role of the project manager, and always put your name down on documents as the project manager, etc., and approach everything from that perspective. So if you know who you are in the project, what stage of the project you're in, you'll find it much easier to complete them. All right, so we have our 2 written assessments. The O2 one has 3 parts. don't miss part B because it doesn't have a template. A lot of students skip over that. So make sure you answer all parts A, B, and C. That's completed at the beginning of the project. The 03 assessment has 4 parts, which includes an audio discussion. And on this one, a common oversight is students submit without answering part D. So just make sure you go through every part and answer each part of the assessment before you submit. And that part is completed as if you are during the implementation and the closing part of the project. So just keep that in mind where you're at. And yeah, it'll help you with your projects a lot. Okay, let's have a look now at the project brief. Because there'll be a mix of students, I won't spend a lot of time on the project brief, but I will highlight the key areas. And if you are using a work-based project, think of your project in line with this kind of information, and it'll help you then when we look at the assessment document on the best way to go about completing it. So this is the project brief for the CRM project that's in the additional resources folder. So download this. It's going to give you a ton of information, particularly for the first scope assessment. It's all basically in this document, and you just need to put it into the right part of your scope management plan and project authorization form that you'll complete. So when you come on down, you've got obviously your contents page there. You'll have a bit of background about the company, so really get to know the company. This is going to show you the corporate department that you will be able to draw your project team from. So keep this in mind, and we'll come back to this a little later. It's got the problem, why are we introducing a new CRM, what the options were and what the decision was. Then it's going to say, with this particular project, this is the objectives. This is what we're trying to achieve with this project, and these are the key success factors. So you can go through those. It's going to tell you what's included in the project, so what's in scope, and then what's out of scope, so what your exclusions are. So where I was talking before about in and out of scope, this is going to document what's in scope and what's out of scope. Then you've got your roadmap. So this forms the foundation of your work breakdown structure. So you have the different stage, the analysis stage, and then you've got your tasks and your milestones. So when you're doing your work breakdown structure, you've got all these key tasks and then the milestones underneath that you'll be achieving. And you'll see that through each part, the design stage and what's relevant there, the development stage, etc. So you'll come on down, and you've also got this timeline which highlights these 8 stages, which are within this column here. You'll see each of these. So I would be using this as the foundation for your work breakdown structure, and then breaking it down with a lot of these milestone tasks underneath each one. And I would do that because this timeline gives you the duration for each of those. So when you then carry that work breakdown structure across into your developing up your Gantt chart, it's going to be much easier to develop it because you already know the days, and then you can just break down those days within the different tasks under each stage. So you're able to sort of break it down a lot easier by using that as your foundation. It's going to give you what your deliverables are for the project, some of the constraints on the project, the governance structure. So this is important to know because you've got your project board, yourself as the project manager, and then you've got your project team. And this is where I said that diagram up here, above here, is going to give you all of the people, oh, it's a long way up, that you can draw from as internal employees that you can pull together to include into your project team, and then they will fall within that part of it. So get your head around this governance structure, and it will really help as well when you need to start thinking about this. And it's going to tell you within here what the roles are that you need to fulfill within your project team. Then we go into change management, the steps that need to be taken if a change is needed within the project, what those steps are. It also covers risks, the costs of the project, so this will also carry across into the cost module later on, and then your key assumptions. And the key thing under here to be aware of is here it says that project personnel will be sourced internally and current IAJ employees will contribute to the project. So that's why you can use that corporate structure to draw your project team from. And then you've got your approval and final acceptance of the project and what's needed for project acceptance at the end of the project. So as you'll see, this project brief is very extensive and covers a lot of the information that you're going to need when you complete your project documents. So that's a big one to keep an eye on. So let's go to that O2 assessment, and you'll see here, once again, if you're using a work-based project, keep that project brief in mind because that's the kind of information that you would need to apply from your own work project. When you come to your document, this is where I was saying make sure you put your student name and number on here, and then you'll come down to this first part is on every assessment document. It just says that there's a quiz and 2 written assessments, so you can skip over all of that and come down to the specific assessment instructions. And you'll see in this part that there's 3 parts. Part A is the project authorization, Part B, project governance, and Part C is your scope management plan. So they're your 3 parts that you need to do. It's going to give you a breakdown of what needs to be included in your project authorization form. It's going to tell you what you need to include for your governance, and it's going to tell you what you need to include for your scope management plan. Now, for parts A and C, there are templates. So for example, it will say use Appendix 2. Here it will say use Appendix 1 for Part A. So you've got templates for Part A. Part B will be written paragraphs. You could include a diagram. If you're using your own project, you might include a organizational chart or something in here to show the governance. And you can refer to the project briefers guide if you need to. And then Part C is the template as well. So whenever there's templates, you'll find they will then be included in the appendices, and you can just complete these documents. So the first one is the project authorization form. You'll put the project title, the sponsor, and your name as the project manager and your project team members that you can select. Start date, end date, budget, that will all come from that cost section. Just a note here, you've been given the GST inclusive total of 440,000. Whenever you want to do an ex GST total and you're going backwards, you need to divide the total by 11 to get your ex GST. And you can then test that out in reverse by taking your ex GST and adding your 10% GST onto it, and you will get this figure. So this way, from ex to inclusive, you add 10%, but if you're going backwards, you need to divide by 11%. So just keep that in mind. A lot of students divide it by 10 and it ends up the wrong figure here. So that's just a little hint. Project objectives, deliverables, constraints, they were all those sections within that case study. This is where you'll use that roadmap to complete the stage, the deliverables and the milestones within each one of those. So you just complete that from that roadmap. And that's the authorization form completed. So as you can see, it's very practical and quite straightforward. Same thing with your scope management plan, bit of a summary on what the project is all about, an outline of the roles and responsibilities of your project team, who they are, what they're going to do, define the scope. So that can be just a brief couple of sentences on what the purpose of the project is all about, and a brief definition of the scope, because what you're going to do here is then say specifically what's in scope and what's out of scope. If it's your own work-based project, just make sure you've included the specifics of what's in and out of scope, and then your major milestones, which is going to be your major milestones and what date they were going to be delivered on in that section. That was that table in the project brief that you've got there, what the success criteria is, what's going to determine that this project was a success. Some key meeting dates. This isn't provided for you specifically, so you would just need to work out, when the different meetings are going to take place within your project, when are the project team meetings going to take place, when you're going to meet with the project board or with SAGE representatives, etc. So just some key ones. It doesn't need to be minutely detailed, but just sort of high level. Your work breakdown structure, as I said, use that roadmap and your milestones, timeframes as your guide for this, and include that in here. Scope verification is where you're going to just make a statement of how is the scope going to be verified, so who's going to accept it, and in this case you'd be looking at the project board accepting that the scope is accurate and it meets their requirements. So just a sentence or two. Scope control that's your control process, so when the change is needed in the project, what are those steps? What's going to take place when a change is needed? So once again, go to that procedure and just summarize that sort of in here, and then what's going to be required for the acceptance of the project as well in that section. So once again, that's just some of the key things that these two are looking at: the project board and what they need to do to verify the scope and then to accept it. Then we've got the assumptions, any dependencies, risks or constraints, so that are going to specifically apply to the project, and then you'll sign off with your project name. So as you'll see, this particular assessment is very practical, and if you're using the case study, almost all of these sections are included in that project brief. Some of it you'll need to just summarize or list in a bit more detail, but a lot of it will carry across because that's what you've been given as your brief, and now you are formally putting it into your planning documents. So you're going to want to stay as close to what the sponsor wants as possible. And this is just the initial stage of documenting it all. Then we get into the stage where changes happen. So it's very practical, and most of it will come from the project brief. If you're using your own work-based project, you'll have a lot of this similar stuff that you'll have already completed when you have done your scope management plan, etc. So that's that one. I'll just take another 5 minutes and just quickly have a look at the last one. But before you go on to the third assessment, you're going to need to go to the memo that's in Module 1. So it's an inter-office memo from Tommy Widojo, who is the CEO, to you as the project manager, and he's basically saying to you that they've reviewed the processes, financial processes, and they now want to add the accounts team as a user of the CRM. So we now want to add the accounts team in. So that's going to be the basis for your change in assessment 3. So make sure you refer to this document. If you're using your own project, come up with a change to scope that you can use as the foundation for your project, because that's basically what this last assessment's all about. Once again, come on down to where you see assessment 3, and it's going to break down the 4 parts of the project. So this one has an audio phone call to discuss the scope amendment that's needed. Then you're going to complete a change order form, complete an issues register, and finally you're going to identify at least 2 improvements of how could managing the scope through all of this, defining the scope, documenting it, managing changes, etc. Any of the scope processes that you've looked at, how could things have been done better to avoid some of these issues that have come up? So that gives you a summary. Once again, come on down. Part A will tell you what's needed and what you need to do. The 4 things of what you need to make sure that you cover in that conversation. So that becomes the flow of your conversation, I guess. And then you can upload it. If you are using, it does say here when you come on down, sorry, the person doing the audio with you will need to sign the consent form. But when you come on down, you'll see that there's briefing notes for your role play partner. So this will tell them who they are playing. They are going to be the finance manager. So you're the project manager. You're phoning the finance manager saying, I've just been requested by the CEO, Tommy Widojo, that we'd like to incorporate the accounts team into the CRM project and have a discussion with her about what that means. Explain what the project looks like, what it's all about. Ask them what their major concerns are, and then your role play partner can talk about these issues that they're concerned with, and you can make note of those and have that sort of discussion. So these issues become the foundation for your issues register. So you'll have this discussion, talk to them about the fact that you're bringing them onto the project, ask if they've got any questions, answer their questions, ask their issues, etc. So then you'll come up to part B, where you're going to actually document that change on the change order form in Appendix 3. So come down to Appendix 3, and you've got your change order form, project name, dates, numbers, name, etc. Come down to your change request, the fact that we're now adding the accounts team to as a user of the CRM project, and a bit of background information as to why that's occurred. So you'll get that out of that, the memo and some of the other information there. Then you're going to say what impact adding the team in, what impact is that going to have on the quality or the service of the project? What impact is it going to have on the schedule and on the cost? It might have a positive impact. For example, adding them would be great, but it might add some extra time, so it might have a negative impact on time. It might add some extra cost, but that cost might be minimal, so it might have a low impact, or it might be a medium impact, etc. So always note whether it's a positive or negative impact and what level of impact, and a brief explanation of what that is. It might add 2 weeks, or it might extend the costs by so much, or it's going to be great because all departments are going to be using the same system. So make your comments and note it here. This is probably one of the most important parts of this particular document. And then who you need to communicate with. Obviously the finance manager will be one of them. Who needs to be notified of the changes, and then complete. This is filled in by yourself and approved by Tommy Widojo, etc. So you'll complete this, have the conversation, complete your change order form, document those issues that were raised in here, what date that was, who's going to fix and address that issue, by when, etc. So make sure you complete these documents and allocate a deadline for it. So this is where you start to now show your management skills. So you'll look at, okay, it's been raised on here, how long do you want to give them to fix that issue, etc. And you can look at your milestones and things like that for that, but this becomes the issues that were raised in that phone conversation. Then this is why a lot of people miss part D, because they get here and go, oh, I finished, submit. But that issues register is the template for when we come back up to the actual task for part C, where you're using the appendix. But there's still part D, where you need to identify some improvements. So this is going to be a couple of paragraphs, about 400 words. So 200 words on each improvement that you could come up with, and write that in a little paragraph. You can either type that in straight under here, or you can type it in at the end of the document, so that as you're going through, you've got part 2, third part of the assessment, and you can put in your improvements here. Wherever it is, just make sure it makes sense for the assessor. But that's why a lot of times that part is missed. So once you've completed those 4 parts, and we'll just come back up to here, you've got your audio conversation, your change form, issues register, and make some suggestions on how things could have been done better. Then that's completed. Upload your audio file and this document, and then submit it. Once that is done, you are done with Module 1 and ready to carry what you've done in this assessment, your work breakdown structure, etc., will then all carry across into the second module on managing time, and you will then develop up your schedule based on the work breakdown structure in here. You'll do your budget based on the information that's in here as well, etc. So you'll see that everything will build as you go through the course. Okay, I know I've gone slightly over time, but hopefully that has covered everything. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them now, and I'll go through a couple of the questions here. I'll just swap this over because we're recording. Okay, so I've got one question here. I take it there are not webinars for each module. At the moment, I've just been doing this first one just to initially get students started well, but I am now every second week going to be choosing other modules that are sticky points for students. So next week, for instance, I'm doing a module on sustainability assessment, and I'm going to be recording them so that they can be uploaded. So if you get to an assignment that hasn't been done or whatever, you can come back to it. Yeah, but I've only just started them, so it'll take a little bit of time to upload them all. But whenever there is a new module being run, a new webinar for a new module, all the students that are within that particular module already will be emailed with the link to let you know. And I'm going to make sure I put it on the forums as well, so just keep an eye out. But if there's a webinar being run for the module you're in, there will be an email and you'll be notified that way. And then eventually they'll all be recorded and you'll be able to access any of them. So as I said, I'll record sustainability next week. So when you come to that module later on, you'll be able to refer back to it and watch it that way. So yeah, I think the webinars are proving to be very beneficial to students. Any feedback is welcome. So please make sure if you've got any feedback, as I develop up more webinars, it'd be great to hear your feedback on if it's been helpful or if there's things that you'd like more information on. So yeah, any other questions or feedback, please feel free to message me anytime. We do have one other question. Please explain about XGST. Okay, so whenever you've got costs, usually they will be either given to you inclusive of GST or XGST, and you'll need to, you might be looking at on your costings specifically whether it's XGST or inclusive of GST. So GST is the goods and services tax that's on most goods and services. There are certain ones that are exempt. So you'll see it when you go to the grocery store. If you ever look at your docket, you'll find that there's, you know, 3/4 or more of your docket will be GST goods, and there'll be some that will be ex-GST, and we'll have a summary at the end. So when you are completing it, you'll find in the project brief the costs that are given to you are all inclusive of GST. So they've already got the 10% GST added onto those costs. So if you then need to go backwards and say, if a cost is, in this case, you know, the project is 440,000, that's inclusive of GST. So if you ever need to find out the ex-GST amount, you need to divide it by 11, and you'll find dividing 440,000 by 11 will give you 40,000. If you divide by 11, you'll get 40,000. If you take 40,000 off, the ex-GST will then be 400,000. And you can check that, because if you've got 400,000 ex-GST and you add 10% GST onto it, you would have 400,000. 10% of that is 40,000. So 400,000 plus 40,000 would give you 440,000. So yeah, it's just, most of the time you'll be working with GST inclusive figures, so you'll treat it as if those numbers have GST already included. But if it particularly says, like on that authorization form, what is it X, you would need to divide that figure by 11 to get that X GST. So I hope that sort of explains it for that part. All right. Great. I think we'll leave it there then. If you do have any other questions, please send me a message through Open Space. And thank you so much for giving up your Monday night to join me. I really hope that it gives you a good idea as you move forward with your assessments on how to complete them. But as I said, please feel free to, join any other ones, message me anytime. I love hearing from you all, and I'm sure you're all going to do wonderfully as you move through the course. And I truly do wish you all the very best with your studies. So have a great rest of tonight. Have a great week. and I'll look forward to your assessments coming through. Happy studying, everyone. Bye.